Well, look, electric vehicles are on the rise on the roads. A recent survey suggests that a fifth of car owners hope to switch to electric in the next 5 years. Are you one of those 1 in 5?
Not at present.
Not at present. OK, well, I'm going to let you hear what the conversation that I had and see if you're convinced. But are all electric cars as green as we think? Consumers tell us there aren't nearly enough public charging points. You've heard that a lot. And do let me know what's available or not available, or what's not working, public charge points in your area. 30 30 80 55 55 or text 81771. But the Consumer Council has published a new guide to help consumers understand what switching to electric entails. And earlier I talked to Hannah Brown about it, along with Mark McAuley. He's the chair of the Electric Vehicle Association.
Yeah, well, I guess we're EV evangelists, so we are encouraging the uptake of EVs, Linda, but, we do have to say, as we have done for years now, that Northern Ireland lags behind. We are, measurably the worst part of these islands compared to England, Scotland, Wales, the Republic of Ireland. The last Department for Transport figures just out a few weeks ago showed that the UK average for charging devices, all speeds, per 100,000 of population was around 60 for Great Britain, and Northern Ireland currently sits at around 20. So we're 1/3 of the GB average for charging devices per 100,000 population.
That's depressing.
It is, but we caveat that by saying the end of last year, Q3 of 2022, was the first time we're in our 7th year now as an organisation, and that was the first time we saw an increase. So pre-pandemic charger levels, 2019 we had around 340 chargers. As of today, we've got around 430, I think. We're just working on some figures for the Department for Transport and SatMap at the moment. So around a 26% increase in chargers since 2019. But if you look at plug-in car sales, in 2019 we sold around 580 plug-in cars in Northern Ireland, and last year, 2022, we sold just short of 6,000. So we've had a 10x increase, or 1,000% increase in car sales per annum, against maybe a 26% increase just in infrastructure.
So it sounds like the public want to do it.
Absolutely. I think, it's becoming definitely clearer that that's the direction of travel. There's an awful lot of disinformation out there, and a lot of parties with other interests maybe that are trying to put people off. The nonsense in the media is incredible at the moment.
For example?
Car parks are falling down, and EVs have emit more CO2 than a diesel car, and all these things that are clearly nonsense and well debunked. But
they do say that it costs more to make an electric car than it does to make a petrol or diesel car. Is that true?
Costs more, and there's definitely more carbon in the manufacture as well. But that's offset quite quickly. Generally within the first year, 18 months of sort of average driving, that CO2 will be offset. And of course, the manufacturing processes around the world, just like our homes and our grids here, are decarbonising as well. So that carbon aspect to creating a battery is also reducing as factories around the world go under renewable energy.
Hannah Brown, as Senior Policy Officer for Transport with the Consumer Council, is it because of this increased interest that you've produced some very useful information, a guide on your website to electric vehicles? I mean, is it because of demand and interest?
Well, it's partly that, Linda. I suppose our role at the Consumer Council, or part of our role, is to provide consumers with information. And electric vehicles is a developing area, and it's something which more of us are going to have the option of. As Mark was saying there, the market for electric vehicles is developing, and certainly the second-hand car market will develop through that. Most of us in Northern Ireland buy our cars on the second-hand car market. I know I do. And what we wanted to do with this electric vehicle online guide is to provide consumers with factual information that can help them to understand what an electric vehicle might mean for them.
And that's a good point. I mean, there's so many different types. There's the all electric. There's the hybrid. There's the plug-in. I think I've got a light hybrid at the moment. I don't even entirely know what that means. It's doing something to a battery. But what are the types, Mark?
I think, unless you're putting electricity into your car, you don't have an EV. Let's just say that way. There are mild hybrids and other sort of types, but a plug-in hybrid or full battery electric vehicle or proper EVs. You know, if you're only putting petrol or diesel into your car, you might have a small battery to recuperate some of your braking energy, but your car is being powered by petrol or diesel there. So we have to be clear about that. We find a lot of our members maybe started off in a plug-in hybrid. That's understandable. You know, you're putting your toe in the water, and plug-in hybrids are getting better and better. They're 50 or 60 miles maybe range now in some of them. Quite often people can do their commute all week in a plug-in hybrid, and then they have the backup of an engine there if they need to. But
so are you saying then that they plug in at home, and then when they go somewhere to work they plug in during the day and top up?
Yeah, that's another good point. You know, charging at work is something that we're seeing a lot more of. I think most of our members still would charge at home, but workplace charging certainly is going to have a role in the future.
But plug in and your range, that's the thing I hear people anxious about. I'm quoting figures, and I may be right or wrong here, but I'm saying the average petrol car, the range is 700 miles, and for an electric vehicle it's 217. That may be in or around it, Mark.
Sure.
But yet most of us don't drive that every day.
Exactly. You know, the figures for Northern Ireland, I think, are something like 14 miles a day, average journey, something like that. So a lot of us tend to think about the one occasion in the year when, you know, we need to drive to Cork or something, you know.
The big drive.
Yeah, the big drive. But, you know, having driven my son to university in Manchester with a 200-mile range car, I had one 20-minute stop between Manchester and Lisburn, you know. So.
And yet when we had chaos on the roads in England, I can't remember what the reason was for it recently, maybe the train strike, maybe it was that. I gather there were queues of people queuing to get into the charging stations and running out of charge while they were getting there. It's an ideal situation, it works. If things go wrong... I
think that was the exception rather than the rule. That was during a train strike, and it was at one particular very popular services in the north of England on a bank holiday Monday. You know, so
what could go wrong? Perfect storm and all that. Yeah,
I think, you know, no EV driver will say we don't need more infrastructure. That's certainly the one thing that everyone would ask for. And
when we've talked before, Mark, we've talked about different places where the charging stations aren't working. I think it was Newry. A man called John used to ring and tell me that you know he really wanted to use them, but they just weren't working. That was because the demand and the infrastructure wasn't there?
Well, that's the sort of incumbent network in Northern Ireland is run by ESB, and around 19 months ago now they announced that they were replacing all that 10-year-old hardware. That work really still hasn't started to this date, despite several deadlines passing, so we're not really sure why. We're told that it's going to start, I think we're supposed to start in April, and now it's supposed to start this month, but that's taken too long.
But the old infrastructure was free, and now people are going to have to pay.
Yes.
Which in many ways is good, because it will...
Great news for EV drivers. As we said before on your programme, it's a bit strange for EV drivers to be asking to charge, and that, I would say, that didn't sit well with everyone. You know, certainly some EV drivers, particularly those who can't charge at home, who are benefiting from the free charging and now have to pay at public charging rates. So we're always asking DFI about the ability for people with no driveways to cross the pavements. You know, there are several solutions out there now. Gully is one of them, and another one called Kerbo that puts a little slot in the pavement and allows you to charge from your own home, you know, even if you don't have off-street parking. But in general, that turning on pay to charge has been a great success. It's freed up a lot of the sites, and I would say 90% of our members are happy with that decision. Of
course, buying an electric vehicle is dearer than buying a standard petrol or diesel, but there is some financial assistance available, Hannah?
There's some, the thing is, you won't apply for the grant yourself. It is built into the purchase price of the car. And I think now it's typically just the criteria is quite tight. So it's things like a wheelchair accessible vehicle or a moped, or, you know, it's quite strict, the criteria. And even for home charge points, for grants for those, there are grants available, but they're really for rented properties or if you live in a flat. So it's quite restricted, the criteria in terms of grants.
And might your employer be able to help?
Well, there is workplace charging, so you might be able to avail of charging through your workplace. Salary sacrifice is another thing, so you could benefit through those ways. Those things are all mentioned within the guide, so it's worthwhile anyone who is interested in those checking the guide out, and there's online links in the guide to click through for more information.
Your guide also gives comparisons for how much it's going to cost to actually charge and the different types and how long it'll take. There's some very useful information in this guide, I must say. I find it very informative.
Yes, there's some useful information in the guide, and I mean, you were saying there about range being an issue for people. We've done a survey recently where we asked consumers, do you intend to change your car to an electric vehicle within the next 5 years? And around 70% said they weren't sure or no. And we asked them why, and the main reason was cost. So people are concerned about the cost of an electric vehicle being more expensive compared to petrol or diesel cars. Now, the second reason was the public charging infrastructure, and then I think that was followed by the cost of a home charge point. So the range anxiety, as they talk about, is kind of falling back in terms of concerns for consumers, and it's more really about the public charging infrastructure. Is that there to support them?
Of course, you are saving money because you won't be paying tax and that kind of thing. That's one of the things, at least for a while.
At the moment, now that's changing come April 2025, I think, when electric vehicle drivers will have to pay tax for their cars. So things are changing with electric vehicles, and it's all about keeping up to date with the information, and we will keep the guide up to date as well as things evolve.
It's a changing environment, but it's an attitude of mind, isn't it, Mark? You have to think this will be good, not only for the environment, but for me personally, because most people will think how much it's going to cost me. You've got the cost of putting in the big plug, as I called it. I'm sure you have a more technical word for it.
Yeah, the home charger, it is an expense, certainly, but, as Hannah rightly points out, the running costs are different for an EV, so yes, the purchase price is still dearer than a fossil fuel car, but taking our probably like a current overnight charging rate in Northern Ireland of 15p, that's on the Economy 7 rate, that works out around 4p per mile, and that's probably compared to around 12p a mile for petrol or diesel at the moment. So if you're doing 10,000 miles a year, you're paying £400 to run the EV versus £1,200 to run the fossil fuel car, so £800 a year saving in fuel alone.
The guide explains in detail exactly what an electric car is, plug-in, hybrids, all those different kinds of things. Are you feeling there's much more interest in Northern Ireland?
Well, I suppose as electric vehicles become more commonplace, and as I've said, the second-hand car market is developing in terms of electric vehicles, more of us as consumers will have the choice of an electric vehicle. So we do expect then demand for those vehicles to increase,
and that might bring costs down.
And it might bring costs down, and it is expected that the cost of an electric vehicle compared to petrol or diesel will decrease over time as well. And people should also take into consideration the running costs of an electric vehicle are much less compared to the petrol or diesel car.
What about an MOT? Do they get MOT'd?
Yes, they'll be MOT just the same as your petrol or diesel vehicle, but they won't be subject to emissions tests and so on.
That's Hannah Brown of the Consumer Council, Mark McCall, Chair of the Electric Vehicle Association here in Northern Ireland. Really good guide on the Consumer Council website. You can follow the link from our website. All the questions that you really need to answer. And yet people still have questions and comments, and I'd like to hear from you. A texter came in on 81771 to say, in Westminster Council there are as many charging points as 5 other cities in England. What does that tell you, he asks? Well, it could be worse. A national newspaper said earlier this year that there are more public electric vehicle chargers in one London borough than in 8 other cities combined. So a lot of views coming in on that and how you feel about it and what questions you still need to get answers to. Happy to put them to Mark McCall of the EV Association if you have questions another time, because I know, Jimmy, you have questions. You were kind of nodding and writing notes. What do you feel?
Well, cost is a continually worry to me on that. The electric vehicle is equivalent to the petrol vehicle. There is a substantial difference in cost upwards. It is quite a bit more expensive. I actually went and looked at I'll not make the particular make, and I knew exactly how much it cost me to buy a new one, and when I asked how much the petrol one was, I had to virtually be carried out of the place. The shock was so much, the difference was phenomenal. My bigger worry, however, is that I would be inclined to buy a car that's not going to cost me a fortune, so I look for second-hand.
Yeah, well, you see, they probably haven't come through onto the second-hand market yet.
That I would imagine, but they have something that's going to worry me considerably. I would be looking to buy a car with about 40,000 miles on it, and that car and I would virtually get married, because it would be 140 before I parted it from it. And I have never had any bother doing that if you pick a big beast of an engine that will do good mileage. I don't doubt for 1 second that the electric cars will do good mileage, but the batteries have a lifespan of about 70 to 90,000 miles. And that means I would be putting new batteries into it, and new batteries into it is expensive.
Yes, a texter came in and said that, funny enough, too, about the cost of the batteries and the lifetime.
Well, there's a like of myself thinking, no, great, here I am, grand stop, and all of a sudden some very nice little person is going to come along from one of the nice agencies that's selling them and tell me you may sort of leave home and get a mortgage on it to get a new battery.
Early days. Well,
it is early days, it may improve, but the other thing that worries me is the absence of a chain of people who are able to work on the things, who are not coming from the major garages. I wouldn't, it's just not right to say it, I just wouldn't want to spend the money that we charge per hour in some of the garages in town. And I find people who have a good name and a good reputation that
expertise.
Have to know what they're talking about and have done it and are a heck of a lot more reasonable paid. There's not going to be the same on that for quite some time with electric vehicles. So by the time they have it all fixed up, I probably will be.
Maybe not in our day.
I will have little wings and a harp and I'll keep an eye on it. Well, hopefully.
And of course we need the charging points. I mean, I know some of the areas are very badly served, but we'll keep interested in the whole subject as it unfolds. And Mark McAuley, I'm sure, will come back and tell me more. If you have a question, do get in touch. 30 30 80 55 55 or text 81771 or even email oyb@bbc.co.uk.